So clams and oysters are a little bit different in as far as how they're grown and the processes we go about as far as taking care of them. But they basically start off the same. What Cherry Stone will do is in their hatchery, they will have male and female clams and oysters in separate tanks. And then what they do is spawn those clams and oysters, create the larvae, get them to a certain size, and then they put them in what's called and all of that is taking place inside a hatchery or a nursery, which basically is like a big greenhouse.
Hey everyone, can you believe it? It's that time again for another episode of the podcast everyone's talking about, Dirt Road Discussions. We were all about agriculture all the time. I'm your host, Cam Hammond. The co-host of Dirt Road Discussions is someone who knows a thing or two about a thing or two, Ott Clark. Ott, it's great to be with you again. Not sure if you saw the email, but did you remember to bring your life jacket today?
Oh, I did not. I'm a pretty strong swimmer, though, so I should be all right.
Okay, so you should be good then with today's topic. That's good to hear. So, but real quick before we jump into that, to all our loyal dirt roadies out there, thanks again for tuning in. If you're new to the podcast, we appreciate you spending some time with us. We like to explore new and unique things going on in agriculture and also aquaculture. So we invite you to subscribe to the show. If you want to leave us a comment or an idea for a future show, or if you just want to say how handsome you think Ott is, you can do that at dirtroadpodcast.com. So when you think of farming, though, your first thoughts might go to corn or soybeans or even potatoes. But we're hoping to maybe shift that paradigm a little bit here today as we introduce you into the world of aquaculture and aqua farming. So I think our listeners are really going to enjoy themselves and maybe even learn something new. So the world is our oyster here today, with oyster being the key word. So with that, let's get to it. For our listeners, here is the question. So when you've sat down for a nice seafood dinner, have you ever wondered about the farmers and individuals who help get those aquatic creatures onto your plate? Well, get ready to celebrate our aquaculture farmers. So we're happy as a clam. I'm sorry, I'm just going to keep going with this, to be joined by Kyle Sturgis. Kyle knows a thing or two about aquaculture, working on his family's farm on the eastern shore of Virginia. And Kyle also works for Virginia Farm Bureau as a district field services director. And we're happy to have Kyle with us today. Kyle, thanks so much for joining us here on Dirt Road Discussions. And how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys? I appreciate it.
We're doing
good.
Well.
Good. No, thanks for joining us. Thanks for dealing with those puns. There might be a few more, but
yeah, I need to write them down. They're good. I can use them in the future. So.
There you go, Ott. I had some good ones.
Nice. I celebrated the celebrate one. I thought was gold.
Yes, that one took me a while to come up with. So, but yeah, Kyle, would you mind just starting off the podcast by telling us a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you all again for having me. Like Cameron said, my name's Kyle Sturgis. I'm a fifth generation farmer here in Virginia. I grew up in a region of Virginia called the Eastern Shore. Eastern Shore of Virginia is a peninsula that is surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean on one side and the Chesapeake Bay on the other. My family farms corn, wheat, soybeans. We do some vegetables, snap bean production. And then we also have an aquaculture operation. And which is what we're here to talk about today. So my father and a business partner, a friend of his, started the aquaculture business in the early 90s as a way to diversify our farming operation. And being this close to the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic Ocean, my father thought, what better way of doing that than getting into clams and oysters? So that's what we're here to talk about today. And on just a little quick background on my Farm Bureau side, I was a previous past county Farm Bureau president and got the opportunity to apply to this position with Farm Bureau and decided to jump all over it. Since Farm Bureau has been really great to our family as far as the agriculture side, land-based agriculture side, and the aquaculture side as well. I thought, what better way than to sign on with Virginia Farm Bureau and go to work for them as well. So have a lot on my plate, but look forward to it every day when I get up. I have a wife, Emily, and I have a 2-year-old daughter, Bailey, and then I also have a son on the way in October. So,
Oh boy.
Congratulations. Yeah.
thank you.
He's busy now, but he'll be busier here in a couple months. All right, Kyle, can you tell me a little bit about Cherry Stone Aqua Farms?
Yeah. So Cherry Stone Aqua Farms, so it's run currently by another fifth generation here on the Eastern Shore, Chad Ballard. Chad's family started Cherry Stone Aqua Farms, or Ballard Seafood, in 1895. And from there, it has grown to be one of the largest employers in our county, in Northampton County, which I currently live in. And they do sell clams and oysters to wholesale markets all around the world. Um, some of their biggest clients are grocery store chains like Wegmans, Kroger's, different things like that. They've also shipped them, like I said, all across the world. And when the pandemic hit, just like everybody else, Cherry Stone had to look for different avenues to sell their product. And so they just started and launched in 2020 online sales for home consumption. So anybody in Idaho looking to get some oysters shipped to them can get them shipped overnight. You just go online to Cherry Stone Aqua Farms website, and you can order clams and oysters on there and get them shipped straight to your doorstep. So something they just implemented, like I say, a couple years ago, and that I think that portion of the business has taken off. They're slowly regaining back from COVID and from the pandemic. Those supply chains, or those wholesale distributors that they've worked with before. And those grocery stores. So COVID kind of hit everybody in the agriculture industry, and aquaculture is no different. So, but yeah, that's it. We're a co-op with them. And so what a co-op means then, so what we do is Cherry Stone Aqua Farms, and we can talk about this a little bit more in depth maybe, but Cherry Stone Aqua Farms supplies us with some of the tools we need to grow clams and oysters for them in the Chesapeake Bay area. And we used to grow oysters, and we kind of stepped back a little bit from that, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But we're primarily clam growers for them right now. But they supply us with some of the tools we need, like I said, and they also are growing what we call seed, which is baby clams and baby oysters in their hatchery. So they not only sell the end product, but they also start the clams and oysters in a hatchery. They feed them, they get them up to a certain size, and then they will turn those over to us as a grower, and we go out and plant them. We use the term planting and seed, just like you would in agriculture if you're referring to corn or something like that. But we would go out and plant them in the bottom in the Chesapeake Bay and its adjacent tributaries, and let them grow, take care of them, and then harvest them, take them back to Cherry Stone. Cherry Stone would then grade them out to certain sizes that the customer is looking for, and then ship them out. And then we can get into depth in that if you'd like a little bit more later on. But that is Cherry Stone's business model. They also have some clams and oysters of their own. But again, like I said, it's 13 to 14 of us co-ops that are still working with Cherry Stone Aqua Farms, and my family started it back in the 90s working with them. So
Cool.
Interesting. I think, we're familiar with it with our farms over here, planting, seed, right? But same thing applies to aquaculture. So, and that's what I think is really interesting. So could you touch more on how you grow a clam or an oyster? Because we have a lot of trout production here in Idaho. So I'm assuming it's a similar type thing, but yeah, just talk us through the process of actually growing a clam or an oyster.
Yeah. So clams and oysters are a little bit different, and as far as how they're grown and the processes we go about as far as taking care of them. But basically start off the same. What Cherry Stone will do in their hatchery, they will have male and female clams and oysters in separate tanks. And then what they do is spawn those clams and oysters, create the larvae, get them to a certain size, and then they put them in what's called, and all of that is taking place inside a hatchery or a nursery, which basically is like a big greenhouse. And at that time, they will supplement feed them with algae that is grown in house. So they grow all their algae and nutrients that these clams and oysters will need to survive at that time. They're filter feeders. So they take in phytoplankton and algae from the water and consume that in order to grow. So at that time, they sit there until they get to a certain size, and then they go into what is called upwellers. What an upweller is they're transferred outside in these circle tanks, and that's where they're introduced to actual bay water or seawater. So the actual salt water and bay water from the Chesapeake Bay comes into those upwellers. It circulates through, goes back out into the bay, and that's where they get their first taste of actual bay water. And they do that for several reasons: to get them acclimated, make sure there's no disease, anything like that in them. And then once they sit in there for a little while, then they will come to us as the grower, and we will go and plant them. So one thing to keep in mind, again, this so many similarities to land-based agriculture. We rent the bottom from a landowner, or some cases, some co-ops own the bottom. And what it is basically that landowner, the person that owns that land, they own out to the mean low water mark. So on an average low tide, you have high tides and low tides. On an average low tide, that is where that person's land stops. So we can rent or buy that land all the way out to that average, low water mark. It's not clearly defined a lot of times. It's not like there's a bunch of poles up in the Chesapeake Bay, telling you, hey, your property stops here. You can kind of see it on some aerial maps with some lines drawn and stuff like that. But we have a good idea where that is. And what we do is clams. We'll start with clams. So clams are grown in what's called what we call beds. And a bed is a rectangle shape that we have laid out on that ground, okay, in the sand. And it's usually 60 foot long by 14 foot wide. And we plant the seed in there. And when I say we plant the seed, what we do is we have what's called a plot marker. So once we have gotten that seed from cherry stone, it's been through the upwellers, it's gotten to a point that they have transferred it on to us as the grower. We pick it up from cherry stone, take it over, and we'll probably plant about 10 beds a day when planting time is around. So we do this. Clams are a 24/7, 365 days a year. It's not like there's a season for them. They're constantly growing. They're always out there in the bay growing. So we don't plant every day, but when it's our turn to plant, like I said, there's other co-ops as well. So when it's our turn to plant, we'll go pick our seed up, take it, lay out this plot marker, which is the same dimensions as the bed. It floats over top of the area that we're going to plant them in. And this is all tide dependent. So, on a very high tide, obviously we can't go out there and plant this stuff if it's over our head. So you're always playing the tide. So in order for us to do any work out there, we're constantly watching the tide, the weather, determining when we can go out. So one morning we may wake up and start our morning at 5 o'clock and get out there early and knock everything out, or we may have to wait until after lunchtime in order to get out there to be able to work. But we set this plot marker up. We go inside this plot marker with the seed. The seed are in tubs. We plant it out by what we do is we just distribute it evenly by hand out into the plot in this defined area. It sinks down to the bottom. And then those clams will actually pull themselves into the sand and mud and bury themselves into the mud. So we don't have to do any of that for them. They do that themselves. And then we have a crew behind us coming right directly behind us, and they'll roll a net over top of that bed. And it's a mesh net that, again, is the same dimensions as the bed. That's held down by gravel bags. So we have long cylindrical gravel bag tubes that are filled with gravel that sit on that net and hold it down. The net is to be there to keep predators out. So we have a lot of blue crabs in the Chesapeake Bay and a lot of bullfish, what we call bullfish. It's a type of skate or stingray. If you think of a skate or stingray, that type of fish, they're bullfish, and they will get in there and absolutely just devastate a bed of clams if they're not covered or protected. So each one of those rectangle beds holds about 50,000 clams in it. And we let them grow for a while. Clams, compared to oysters, are very low maintenance. Oysters are more intensely managed than clams are. And so we'll go in and we'll sweep the bed every now and then. We'll come out and check them. but there's a period of about a year and a half to when that clam gets to marketable size. So I've been out there in the middle of winter before where we've had to cut holes in ice in order to get out there to harvest clams. And I've been out there in the middle of the heat of summer to harvest clams. So it just all depends on when we get them from Cherry Stone, our planting date, and then also current plays a lot into that because, like I said earlier, they're filter feeders. So the more current you have in your area or your section of the bay or your creek or tributary, the faster they'll grow because it's more food available for them to eat. So that's how we grow a clam. It's a very low maintenance. The biggest part is just planting and harvesting for clams, and then when it comes to oysters, that's a whole different animal. And we can touch on that too if you'd like. So,
Oh man,
yeah, wow.
Yeah.
You could have asked me 1,000 times how clams are harvested or, farmed, and I would not have come up with that idea.
So,
Okay, Kyle, you mentioned male and female clams, and I haven't been able to quit thinking about this question. Are they bulls or rams? Do they have names, or is it just a male clam?
I've never given them a name, and I haven't heard them called. Maybe
Oh
somebody else
man,
calls them
that's
something.
disappointing.
Yeah, I don't. But since we're talking about agriculture, maybe I ought to bring that up at the next meeting there or something.
The next co-op meeting, say,
That's
hey,
right, get it changed. Yep.
yeah,
So,
yeah, the rooster clam over here. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was wondering kind of a similar thing too. So, I mean, in Idaho, we of course grow a lot of potatoes, got a lot of different varieties of potatoes. Is that similar how it is with clams and oysters? Are there different varieties of those two things? And
not really. So that if you were to look at genus, species, all that stuff, they're basically the same clam and oyster. The clam would be Mercenaria. Mercenaria is the Latin name of it. Hard clam, it's a hard clam. And then we have what we refer to in the business as different sizes. So if you were to go to a restaurant or you were to order clams from the grocery store or online, ours are delineated by size. So we have what's called little necks starting off. So a little neck is 7/8 of an inch clam, and that's measured across the hinge on the backside of a clam. So you got to remember they're like a bivalve. So a bivalve has two halves. It's got two shells that come together, and that meat is inside of that, inside those shells. That shell grows with them throughout the year based off of the algae and the food their intake. By calcium carbonate, it secretes calcium carbonate to create that shell. So we measure across that back hinge. Then you move up from little necks to middle necks. We call middle neck, and that's roughly a 1-inch clam, something like that. Then you go to what's called top necks. Top necks are 1.5 inches, somewhere in there, from 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches clam. And it's all based upon what the customer's preference is, what they're looking for that day. Oysters, we deal with the Eastern oyster, which I know you all are close to Washington, Oregon, that whole Pacific Coast area. Their oyster is a little bit different, I believe, out there, but we deal with the Eastern oyster, which is found up and down the Eastern seaboard. And what's pretty cool about them is they are actually triploid oysters. So all farm raised, you have two types. You have farm raised, which was what we deal with. When we were growing them, my brother actually has his own business. He grows some oysters, farm raised oysters. And then you have wild caught oysters. So there's still some watermen out there that are going out and catching wild caught oysters off of reefs, or dredging them from the bottom out in the Chesapeake Bay. And what we're primarily dealing with is a farm raised oyster that's a triploid. So it has 3 sets of chromosomes. It allows them to grow a lot faster. So the turnaround time is much shorter than a wild caught oyster to get to the size that restaurants are looking for. It offers more meat in that oyster. So it's a lot more meat in there. And then, of course, no reproductive organs as well. So all of that juice and a lot of the slime and different things you get from a wild caught oyster, you don't have that in a farm raised oyster. So it's purely meat. So a lot of restaurants really like that because of that.
Well, that's exciting. Well, once again, we've been joined by Kyle Sturgis. Kyle, it's been a blast. We appreciate you being on the show today and telling us some more about your expertise in aquaculture. And if any of our listeners want to order some oysters or some clam, where can they go do that at?
Yeah, so if they just Google Cherry Stone Aqua Farms, the very first thing that pops up is their website.
Well, Kyle, we definitely appreciate you and all the work that you do there for Virginia Farm Bureau and just taking care of our the people who feed us. So, Kyle, thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to all you're doing over there, and also all that's going on at Cherry Stone. So, thanks again.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we'll wrap up another episode of Dirt Road Discussions, and we'll see you down the road.